Did the chief stamp licker, and it stuck. That's how we got to it. So I'm going to walk you through some of the stuff about the category we created, but also some of the research we found. We've had some really interesting stuff that actually changed a lot of my perspective on digital too. And we do only sell to digital. We're programmatic first. So I think you'll find it interesting. Tried not to just do stuff about PebblePost, more about what we learned and be able to share it. So first, a little about me. Just so you know, I've been in the space a little over 20 years. I founded a JV with AOL and Omnicom in the mid-90s. And after I sold that company, what we did there was invent or pioneered a lot of what became behavioral targeting and retargeting. I sold the company and then founded a venture fund in the space, built a large portfolio all around behavioral targeting, retargeting, and a lot of the early stages of programmatic, and then left to found PebblePost, which seemed odd to a lot of people. Our team of what we have on our board, our investors, and our employees are from some of the largest in digital that have been successful around the space. And in fact, 14 of my CEOs from the portfolio are investors in PebblePost. You'll know a lot of the companies like Chango, TapAd, Fetchback, Sailthrough, Mass Relevance, iSocket, Movable Ink, Rubicon, Retail Next, blah, blah, blah. 65 companies that I had invested in around the space. A lot of them are now involved with us here, which is really fun, except they get to beat me up about where's their investor report now. So we look at this space and we say, would you rather serve impressions or inspirations? And there's a reason. It might sound a little odd when we're talking about something like direct mail, but direct mail is actually a brand communication of physical media into somebody's home, right? And when you attach the retargeting to it, something special happens. It's not junk mail. Junk mail is irrelevant mail. What we do is relevant and behaviorally targeted mail, run of one. So the thesis behind this, and this goes back through some of my other ventures, we call transactional media. And the transaction element here is the signal. So a consumer on the web can evidence what we call user-driven segmentation, right, by engaging and initiating a dialogue with a brand or a brand's product area. If the brand can discern the meaning out of those signals online, then they can continue that dialogue back to the consumer on a one-to-one basis, leveraging content to drive them to commerce, right? That's a lot of what we did when I founded the JV with AOL and Omnicom in the mid-90s. And this was before the terms behavioral targeting or retargeting. And it's a lot of what we still use today, mainly because what we learned is, and what you'll see, at the brand side, you have to keep efficiency and efficacy and harmony, right? And at the consumer side, you need relevancy and respect, also in harmony. And when these things get slightly out of whack, you need to course correct as a marketer, as a brand, or as a MarTech provider, or it really goes not in a great direction. Like, who thinks all of digital ads today are incredibly respectful? Like, nobody's hand, right? I think digital is kind of, in a way, a lot of it, especially free-range display, has become the new junk mail from the 1970s. But here's what we do, and there's a self-policing here. When we look at the two channels, something that's interesting first, you have the two largest direct marketing channels in history, direct mail and digital, right? And what's interesting is both, over the course of about a 25-year span, grew from about $5 billion in market size and a few hundred providers to about 70 billion and thousands of providers. And what happened is you have all these point solutions that don't talk to each other. Things became very disrespectful to the consumer. Things became sometimes overly relevant. Same with direct mail, right? People say, why do we get this junk, or how did they know this about me? Same thing's happening in digital, right? It's happening right now today. That's not good. So what we did when we put the two together is it solves actually a lot of the problems of both, while it also leverages some of the biggest power of both, right? You have, with going to direct mail, you have to have an address, so it's fraud-free. Going into somebody's mailbox, everybody has to check their mail, sort their mail. We call it survive the sort and go in the short stack. If you go in the short stack, you're in the game. Well, you can't do that. That means it's 100% viewable, right? There's a lot of things here that most people don't realize on regular direct mail. It's been the largest ad spend next to TV for about 40 years, and it's the highest response rate of any media you can buy. And that was with junk mail. Now you attach that real-time behavioral signal, solve all these problems, solve problems for digital, it gets extremely powerful. So what we found in doing this, marketers started saying, you created a new channel. It's the first new channel since search and social, which was great. Like that's an enormous opportunity for us and for everybody else trying to get into the space. But what did that mean? Why? How is that dissected? How does it behave differently? I mean, yes, it's physical media to home. It's not on a small screen. There's a lot of differences that are obvious, but when it came to performance, that was the issue, because performance seemed, and this isn't to pat ourselves, was too good to be true to a lot of the marketers because it behaved very differently and much more powerfully. So we started working with the marketers, and this leads to our research that we wanted to share today. And we had to define a simple way. CMOs were saying, how do I talk to my team, both a boss in the C-suite or on the marketing team or across the teams? How do I talk to them simply and say, why is this so powerful? Why does it work? So we did a listening tour with a lot of CMOs from some of the Fortune 50 brands, biggest in the country and the world, down to upstart DNVBs with really innovative new teams. And this is what we came up with. We call it 90-90-90. It's our construct. And we did this with the marketers. So the first is that 90% of actionable one-to-one intent data we believe is now online. I don't think most people would debate that. 20 years ago, if I wanted to know Jane Smith was going to buy a BMW, the only way I know that is if Jane Smith walks on the car lot, chase her across the asphalt, and get her name and number. Now, 90% of that data is online in some way, shape, or form. The middle 90 is that 90% of meaningful and higher purchase decisions actually happen at and in the home, right? And devices aren't always great for that, even though they reside there, right? Nobody ever taped a banner ad to their fridge and said, honey, is that the right one? We'll get to other examples, right? So the decisions are made there, and digital's great for different parts of the funnel, but not always the right amount of the path to purchase. And the last 90 is that 90% of purchases happen in the physical world. And that's just a fact. It's 90 to 92% actually. If you can get heavy in that in the 10% that's just e-commerce, you're doing great. Look at Amazon. But for a lot, most of brand sales are in the physical world. So when we started applying this construct with the marketers, we looked at setting it up visually like this and then thinking about the channels. And if you're a digital ad, what we found, talking with the marketers, looking at the research we've done and they've done, getting 90% of that one-to-one intent data, that's what digital ads are for, right? I mean, if you can't use behavioral, nobody's doing run-of-site display ads anymore, I don't think. So it's all about the behavioral targeting and the retargeting, and it scores really high. Digital ads actually activating a meaningful and higher decision at home, not so good. Search a little more around discovery. Social's good for engagement, continuity. Email's about continuity, and CRM. Display retargeting is more about reminding somebody to complete a task of a decision they've already made, right? That's why it doesn't get a lot of lift. So we looked at that and said, okay, that seems to be where it ranks with the marketers. And then worse, digital ads really don't drive people to the physical world. That's just not what they're built for. They're great for other things, just not for that part. So we have that. And then if we look at direct mail, which is the largest ad spend next to TV again, you have almost no one-to-one intent data, right? Not so good there. Only about 5% of direct mail can really activate that decision at home, because 95% is irrelevant to when somebody's in market for a good or service. You can't activate a decision with irrelevant media, or Wanamaker would have said 100% of it works, right? It's just not possible. But the big win there is you can go to 100% of purchase channels with direct mail. With physical media, it can drive you with a call to action to desktop web, mobile web, in-app, mail order, telephone order, which are still big in some verticals, like cruise lines and travel or nonprofit, or to physical retail, like a retail store, bank branch, car lot, et cetera. So direct mail has the big win at the other end. And that was interesting. We were talking, especially this one CMO and chief innovation officer, one of the largest banks in the world that we work with. If you overlay digital and direct mail in this construct, you have the two largest direct marketing channels in history that are really high at one end or the other, kind of low in the middle, and actually lower at the opposite end. And we said, whoa, how does this fit? Programmatic direct mail actually captures all three. We get 90% of that one-to-one intent data online. 90% of what we send is relevant at the household level when they're in market for a good or service. That is like totally different than anything else that's shown up at home. And from it, you can go to 100% of purchase channels. That's a way to think about how powerful this can be as a new channel from working with the marketers. And the next, and this gets towards, and then we'll show you some of the examples. We kind of discovered now, working with the marketers, and we're doing a six-figure research study with a number of our brands on this right now. And this will be big on what I think we're finding. It's this new consumer path to purchase. It's changed a lot in about 20 to 25 years. And like I was saying before, there's some things in digital that work really well for it, and there's some things in direct mail that can work well. There's a lot that doesn't, and we're figuring out why. So first, in our 90-90-90 construct, we went to prove that middle 90 of 90% of meaningful and higher purchase decisions are made at home, and it was true. We used a woman, Devorah Rogers. I'm not sure if people here have heard of the Zero Moment of Truth study that was very famous that Google did 10 or 12 years ago. It started with Procter & Gamble announced what they called the first moment of truth, which was standing in a store in an aisle, that's where people would make the decision. That was their moment of truth, right? And then somebody came out with a second moment of truth, which was when you bring the product home, you build a relationship with your brand. And then Google had this idea with search, which was true, that there's a zero moment of truth. When people initiate a search, they actually begin the association to purchase the brand. So we looked and said, where are the decisions made, first off, because we realized, wait a minute, you don't go from a search to a store. You actually consider for a while, and if 90% of those are done at home, that changes the context of how a brand should want to communicate with an individual, especially if you're overloaded on just digital. So we did the research on the middle 90, and it proved true that 90%, we have an extensive amount of other research behind this. It's up on our website, I believe, right, Artie? If everybody wants it, at PebblePost, or we can send it to you, just email. So Devorah Rogers and her team did this, proved the middle 90. We're now working with her and her partner, Rebecca, who did the Zero Moment of Truth, and we're gonna dive deeper. First, we did this, and what we found was about 88% of these decisions are made at home. We just round it and say 90. I think the actual number is 88.7, but it fits a little better. And then what we also found was how many are in consult with somebody else, and that was fascinating. Most people don't share a digital ad with a friend, a family member, a spouse, a child, a coworker, and say, what do you think? Is this the right one? That's a problem. If all these decisions are made at home and most are made in consult with somebody else, and the media that's trying to activate the decision isn't really shared, that's a problem. So we looked, and this is what we're getting through now in our research. This is a bit of a preview. This is kind of astounding. We believe what we're finding is that in the 90s, there were about 400 million meaningful and higher purchase decisions flowing through American households every month. So if you're a marketer, how many apply to you demographically, geographically? How many people are in market at any given time? That was a pretty good number. But what's happened is it's exploded, 1.5 to 2 billion today. And it's changed the path of purchase, and here's why. What we looked at and what we're finding is, first, on search, that was a key part, and Google's Zero Moment of Truth, which they were so far ahead in seeing. There's about 1 million searches or so in the mid-90s. Today there's 2.2 trillion, right? They aren't all for products, of course, lots of things. But the volume of how much people initiate a search when they're thinking about a purchase has exploded since then, including in CPG. CPG back then was about 20% of search. The volume of those searches has gone up dramatically. But secondly, the advent and ubiquity of mobile devices. That means people can initiate a search and a consideration anytime, anywhere they want. They also communicate with other people through those devices when they're in consult on that purchase, right? So you have the amount of decisions exploding, and now we're finding it creates this paradox of choice, right? People do a search for thinking about a product or something they want to buy. They're presented with too many options, right? And they have to consider it. So what happens? The content sourced from the 90s to today exploded by about 5x, right? So think about back then, you would look at maybe a newspaper, a magazine, or a catalog. Today, 15 to 25 online sites are consulted, from review sites to ranking sites to the brand sites to product, everything, right? That's not easy for a consumer to work through. And what does that do? It elongates the consideration weeks. How long are they considering a product? So where an average meaningful purchase might have been 2 to 4 weeks in the 90s, it's now more like 10 to 12, it might be higher, right? Because they have to consider more options. That forces it to happen longer. Another thing, the number of people consulted has also exploded. It was 1 to 2 people in the 90s before mobile devices made it ubiquitous and easy to text or instant message or email, or et cetera. I don't think most people do a voice call much anymore, except maybe with your parents. But it went from 1.2 people in the mid-90s to about 8 to 10 today. So think about your digital ad again. How are you going to take that digital display ad or video and easily have it help somebody navigate multiple people, especially even people on posting on social? Thinking about buying this chair, what do you think? We've all seen that, right? Consumer behavior's changed a lot. And lastly, this spectrum of considered purchase, economic consideration has gone down so much lower to lower dollar items, right? Where emotional risk has gone so much higher. And the reason emotional risk has gone higher is people have invested so much more time and effort in the consideration process and that paradox of choice, as well as communicated with their cohort of people they've exposed this purchase to, that matters to people in their brains, right? So you have, we worked with energy bar companies. A box of energy or granola bars used to be absolutely in-aisle purchase, first moment of truth in the store. We found 2 to 6 weeks consideration of people doing multiple searches, multiple reviews, communicating with multiple people, try and make sure. I mean, if you've ever done a search for even just granola bars, right? Do you want chewy, crunchy, nuts, no nuts, gluten-free, organic, blah, blah, blah. Not easy, and you don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to have to figure out what the right one is again, and you don't want the waste. So you have all these things as examples. That's changed. And so what happens with what we found, some marketing channels work great for it, others don't. What we do, and why we think this is what we've figured out, we process about 10,000 data events online for every one piece of mail rendered and assigned to a household. We look at the behavioral activity, the product segment info, address and identity on our own graph. We go to actual postal, not an IP address, and making a guess who somebody is. We can do the geo-targeting and look at the campaign goal. Is it drive to store, higher AOV? Dynamically render the appropriate piece of programmatic direct mail as a run of one per household per campaign. So 90% of it is relevant when they're in market for the good or service. They can share that. It lasts through, it sits on their kitchen counter or their coffee table or goes in their purse to go to work. During that consideration cycle, can be easily shared with lots of people, right? Via showing it at work or at home or taking a picture and forwarding it. It solves a lot of these problems. And we didn't set out thinking it would solve that. Being honest, we're not Monday morning quarterbacking. This was research working with marketers and working with the brands on why it's working so well. And what we found is it's significantly higher response rate from the marketer's performance. And this helped explain why. And that's our big thing. We geek out on like the why part. How does this work and why? We have lots of case studies on the site. These are all actual. These aren't cherry picked, and they're not like little slivers of campaigns with minimum data. We put them up. You're welcome to help debunk them or whatever. We've gone through with marketers quite a bit on them in different categories. But if you notice, they're kind of meaningful and higher purchases or things with emotional consideration that really matters. These aren't for just a task or utility or display ad retargeting like Criteo, just saying you've already decided, just blast you with the display ads and get you to get it done. There's certain places where it works, and we almost always go after lift. That became our metric with the marketers, saying if we're activating a meaningful and higher purchase decision at home, it should show significant lift, right? And it should produce incremental return on ad spend. Happens to be what a lot of marketers are looking at today and demanding. We just happen to fit in the right spot at the right time with that for them. There's a few more. incremental ROAS, yeah. So it's pretty cool, and we're still learning a lot about it, working with these research leaders as well as the brands on doing it, and having a lot of fun learning about it. So that's why, going back to it, we always ask, would you rather serve impressions or inspirations, right? A consumer wakes up one day and says, I'm inspired to, remodel my kitchen or buy some new clothes or join a gym. They're inspired to do it. They'll think about the brands that inspire them to do it. Like if it's athletics, think about Nike, right? Very inspirational brand. So we look at it and say, you have a chance to communicate on physical media into their home and help inspire them to choose your brand, right, in their consideration process. And that consideration process has radically changed. So I hope that was interesting and helpful. We weren't just trying to do just a pitch about PebblePost. We've been learning a lot, and we geek out on it. Hopefully you guys found it interesting too this morning. Thanks. Any questions? Open to? We'll be around. Thanks.